So this world of publishing, obviously, I mean, of all the people I've ever spoken to in your world, and maybe it's just because you're very clear, succinct, and confident with your thoughts. That might have something to do with it.
I'm a
But
determined oracle.
you're a determined oracle, exactly. I'll have to link people to that in this episode because it might come up a few times. But you are I mean, a determined oracle is someone that is extremely creative, but has the ability to externalize it in a very clear, succinct, confident way. All the processing is happening primarily externally. So your decision making, your communication, it's very fast. There's no fucking around. You're just like, this is it. This is how I feel. This is what I know. And it's not always a feel. It's more just boom. Let's stay logical here in the facts. And because of that, possibly, and also because of the tremendous amount of experience that you have and the time that you've spent, of all the people I've ever talked to in the book world, and that spans authors that have had very successful perennially best-selling books, to people at the publishing houses, to agents, you're the most knowledgeable. You are the most clear in terms of what is going on in the landscape. How did you know that that was a world you wanted to get involved in the first place? Was it about that, or was it more about the books and the writing, or what was it initially?
Well, my original plan was to be a playwright because I was totally impractical. And so I thought of myself as a writer, but the world of books seemed really remote to me. I did not grow up in a book household at all, both parents MBAs. And there's some Agatha Christie's, but there was not a lot of book culture. And a lot of my friends and, growing up, I grew up in Manhattan, were kind of more bookish families. And it all felt very foreign to me. I was a big reader, but I didn't even think about it as an industry at all, even though it's in Manhattan where I was growing up. I just had no exposure to it. And then I got work once I let go of the playwriting dream, which was its own journey. I got a job as a writer, and the editors at that job were higher up on the totem pole, and I'm very status conscious. And it just struck me. I was like, I'm here doing all the hard work of the writing, and they're the ones telling me what I get to write and when I get to write it, and this is good and this is bad. And so it just kind of clicked for me. I was like, maybe I could be an editor, and if I'm going to be an editor, I'm going to be an editor at the best place to be, not at this rinky-dink operation in the South Bronx. And so I reached out to people, and I got myself an internship at Norton. And that was my first exposure to the world of publishing. And Norton is, I mean, if you're going to go any, and I also got interned at another place called Arcade, which is this little teeny publisher run by these amazing, legendary publishers who had kind of gone off to do their little thing with these wonderful, classy authors. It was so glamorous between the two of these internships. It was everything you would want. Fashion has Devil Wears Prada. Like, I really got a glimpse of old world publishing, really the death knell of old school publishing. And I read memoirs. I love memoirs of the heyday of American books. So the glamour of that really struck me, and also the lifestyle of the publishers. But all of it was ending. I didn't realize this. So there came a point as an editorial assistant, I was at an imprint at Penguin, where I realized that ladder that I thought I was going to climb, the traditional ladder, you kind of make your bones as an editorial assistant and assistant editor, and you work your way up, and then suddenly you have a place in the Hamptons and you're meeting with all these famous authors. That ladder was being pulled up by the boomers above us. And
making it inaccessible in a way.
Right. It was over. It was just
over.
The corporate publishing and the mergers, those opportunities were rapidly dwindling. And it was a kind of a pyramid. It's always a pyramid, obviously. Every assistant doesn't go on to be a publisher, but the opportunities at the top were getting smaller and less exciting in terms of the possibilities, the offers being made to someone who's going to, I mean, my peers are now publishers. My peers that I came up with are running their own imprints and in positions of power. They don't live the lifestyles that the people were living when I was an editorial assistant. It's a different industry. So I started to realize I had to get creative and take, the industry was changing, the internet, ebooks, all these things were rapidly changing. The idea that a book publisher could make a book was
Yeah.
changing. And so I had to start figuring out, well, how does a book succeed if it isn't some great, you hear these stories about these great marketing, brilliant ideas. If we talk to all the booksellers, every story from like 1992, it's like I called the booksellers and I got them to do X. I called the librarians and got them to do X. And it was
Mm.
really a small world that all knew each other that made a certain book work. And that
Mm.
kind of publishing almost doesn't happen anymore, where it's inside the book world. All the success happens outside the book world. And the book world is really just operating as a machine, to
Hmm.
turn books into profit, but the work is being done, the marketing and the platform building and the audience, that's all happening outside in podcasts, on YouTube, in
Mm.
on social media. That's all where you don't, as a publisher, you don't really publish anymore. The publisher was someone who made
Yeah.
things public. The publisher was the one who said, "You're special. I'm gonna make you, you know what I mean? I'm gonna make this
Yes.
book get noticed." And that's, aside from the world of literature, of sort of, the cutting edge novel, everywhere else in genre, in business books, in self-help, that's no longer something a publisher can do as much. So I had to get creative.
The same thing is happening to a certain degree in music and in so many other landscapes, right? You have independent musicians and artists that all you got to do is throw it up on Spotify and you are the platform. And I think we first saw that with books, and obviously the digitization of everything has been a catalyst that really created that. So you felt that, you saw that, you noticed that shift. The glamour was kind of fading of the vision of what you thought it would be, and so rightfully so, you pivoted. How did you pivot at first, and what are you doing now? How would you describe it now?
Well, what happened was, so I was working. I was an editor at a Penguin Random. Now it's called Penguin Random House. It was
Mm-hmm.
Penguin at the time, and there's an imprint there called Portfolio, which is still the premier
Yeah.
business book imprint, and they publish many of the major books in the category. And I was at McGraw Hill. I was at all these places, um, and then Amazon said that they were going to be starting a book imprint, and not self-publishing, but a real New York book imprint.
Do you remember
And
when that
rumor,
was approximately?
it must have been 2009, 10,
Okay.
I think.
Yeah.
And so this rumor set publishing on fire. People went nuts about this because they felt like they have a monopoly, like this would give them some sort of unfair advantage, whatever. I saw it as an opportunity because I figured if you take the digital, social, whatever, like the technology part of Amazon and combine it with a blue chip, high quality publishing, and they were hiring, real people, top people
Hmm.
for this. I wanted to get involved in this and see what they could teach me. I wanted to get inside. I was like, wow, imagine, we're so flummoxed by ebooks. What if I could see how ebooks are really like what the next generation ebook is going to look like? Like, what if they're innovating around the Kindle? What if they're innovating about what the books,
Hmm.
the reading experience could be? There's a lot of talk about that. Now that's all over. No one cares about video in a book or whatever. But at the time, we were really thought video in a book or something. I was always playing with technology, book readings inside Second Life. Remember Second Life? Like
Hmm.
anything, Twitter, it all was very exciting. So I thought Amazon would be the perfect place to go to. And I just put myself out there for that role. And I got it and went over there. And I discovered, there's an old joke. I don't think Einstein said this, but there's an old joke that, some beautiful woman goes up to Einstein and says, let's have children,
Hmm.
and they'll have your brains and my beauty. And he said, but what if they have your brains and my beauty? And that's kind of what happened.
Huh.
And it became clear very quickly that we were bringing the worst of publishing, all the sort of
Wow.
backward thinking about it in what we were bringing. And then Amazon was kind of giving us the worst of Amazon. And
Hmm.
it was a learning experience. So at that point, I realized I had to figure out the truly new way forward. And I went to a startup called Creative Live, which is out on the West
Oh
Coast,
yeah, I'm familiar.
and
San
they do
Francisco, right?
courses. Yeah, in Seattle, and they do these very, very high end productions of these courses. And I brought in business authors to teach classes that were kind of like their books, but in this new format, which is really
Yeah.
interesting. And it's definitely the future. Like all this money, all this attention, like people were really watching. Books, by the way, mostly don't get read, especially in the business book category.
Yeah.
And my whole job, I'm always about getting past the third chapter, because you read any review on Amazon and it's like, well, the first three chapters were good. And then, people just stop. So it's like, how can we get people and to see people watching these courses for hours? Some of these courses are like 20 hours and they're watching
Yeah.
all the way through and have that data. I wish we had that data for books. That was really interesting to me. The problem was I really like books. And so now I was really stuck. I was like, I don't want to go and vanish into the world of video or whatever this is. I can't go back to Penguin and that whole thing with paper. And they've caught up a bit. They have Slack now at Penguin right now. So I
That's huge.
decided to do this. If I work directly with the authors, then no matter what happens with the technology, like an agent, I'm right there with the ideas. And so we can adapt to whatever the output is if I'm really close to the input. And so that's what I've been doing. And so I help the authors figure out, because they have a ton of knowledge. It's like, how do I present this to my audience and to find maybe a new audience, a big audience?
It's one hell of a niche, man. It's a very valuable one. It's one in which I imagine it can that I imagine a lot of it is through referrals and just finding the right authors and the right people that need that type of brain on a project like that. And once you find those people, I imagine it's very lucrative, because someone like me, it's like, especially if you're working with business authors in the nonfiction world, they're generally running a company or three, and they typically do sure have some sort of knowledge that they need to extract, but that extraction process is so messy for most people that don't have your background. So it's a really cool, I think, niche that you've uncovered. And the root of what I'm hearing, though, and I think if we go back to kind of the beginning for you, it all kind of still revolves around that passion for the books and writing and reading. As you said, you were like, I was reading a lot. I was, and you obviously deeply enjoy the writing process. What is that writing process like for you? I mean, I've read so many books about writing, by the way. Stephen King's book,
That's a great
who
book.
wrote Bird by Bird? Anne
Lamott.
Lamont. Yes. So there's so many different books I've read on the writing process, because I also deeply enjoy the craft. Even though I'm like, hey, Dave, can you help me out with this proposal? So what does that look like for you? What does it do to you? Is that really your zone that you find yourself where there's the most flow for you?
Oh yeah, for sure. It's all about flow. And that's the toughest part, is getting into flow. That's all I think about, is getting in the zone. And the reason I like this, because editing is similar, because really when at least when I edit, and I'm unusual, I'll say right off the bat. I found I worked for a guy, my first editorial assistant job. The editor I worked for um, was an author himself, and he had actually left publishing to write a few books, nonfiction, really brilliant books. Well, one was fiction, one was nonfiction, as I recall. But he left publishing and worked in comic strips so that he would have the mental capacity to do his own writing. And he actually discovered Calvin and Hobbes on the slush pile
Wow.
during his time. But then he came back to be a book editor, and he was meticulous because he was a writer himself. And so when he edited and I was reviewing what he would do, it was a rewrite. He was really like a collaborator. And I was like, oh, that's what an editor does. I was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
and and in the years since, I've seen what people call editing, and they'll read a page or two, they'll kind of write something in the margin, you know,
Very
expand on
different.
this, that's what you should expect. If you're going to be published by a traditional publisher, you're looking for a book deal, that's what you're going to get.
I was super
And that's why a
curious
lot of
about that.
people,
Yeah, what that's going
yeah,
to be
and
like
that's why
for
a lot of
them.
people go with outside editors, because they're expecting someone to come in and do what I do. For my authors, when I was at places like Portfolio, I was really rewriting, and that, it instilled some loyalty in the authors that I worked with, but it's really tough. But it is very satisfying. And I don't find it satisfying to read 3 pages and write something in the margins. I find it satisfying to get in there, and I'm going to fix it until it sounds right. And then I'm going to move on to the next paragraph. And I'm going to fix that until it sounds right. And so it's really writing, even though I was an editor. And now I do it in an even more pure sense, where we're going directly from the ideas and the research, and I'm starting with a blank page. And it's hard to start. It's hard to get into that flow. Once I'm in the flow, then the time passes quickly. So I use all kinds of tricks. I use a virtual co-working thing called Focus Mate, where another stranger sits on their Zoom, and you you work.
Yeah.
And I have all these procedures and all these rituals. I was reading in the New York Times, an author was talking about she hypnotizes herself. And one of the ways she does this to write is she wears the same shade of ultramarine blue when she writes and everything. And once she puts, it's gotten after years and years and years of this, when she puts on her ultramarine, what it could be anything, a shawl, a shirt, when she puts it on, she's just like, whew, she's in the zone. And I was like, could I pick a
Hmm.
color? But I'm always on the hunt for anything to get me into the zone because anyone who writes will probably has this experience of when you're in the flow state, it's the easiest thing in the world. The problem is getting into that flow state, facing you've got your notes here and you've got some kind of scrolled thing here, like do this on chapter 5. And then you've got to go from that into that state of I'm just going. I'm
Yeah.
not even thinking about it. I'm just kind of putting the Lego pieces together.
I think for you, for her, it was probably just some sort of it's a mental trigger that now we begin no matter what. It's very interesting, and I think everyone has their own. One of the best creative books that I've ever read as well, I think, is Stephen Pressfield's books in general. The war, the art of war of art. I always get those two backwards. He basically describes himself getting into flow as a process of just like I think he literally says sit your ass in the chair and sit there for the allotted time and that's it. And whether you get a word or 1,000 words or 10,000 words, that's it. And you do that every day at 9 a.m. or whatever you've decided. And that doesn't work for me every time because the hardest part is actually starving those distractions. But what I have found that really gets me into this incredible state, and oftentimes it just has to do with environment, is being on a plane. I don't know what it is about being on the plane. Obviously, I think being disconnected. I never get the Wi-Fi. I never log on. I make sure my documents are offline, ready to go. And for some reason, as soon as that plane gets up in the air, my consciousness literally shifts. And actually, another author that I spoke to said something similar about this. Simon Sinek, apparently, when he wrote both Leaders Eat Last and Start with Why, like they would just get him on planes. They'd be like, you're behind. You got let's get him on a flight because that's when his writing would happen. And so I think the process for all of us is so unique and individual. And the hard part is just being like, well, what's actually going to get me there? But as you said, there's so much joy in it once you're there. It's like the most incredible feeling. And that's what keeps you coming back. I imagine for you, that's what it's all about ultimately, right?
It's very satisfying, and I try to lean into that satisfaction. I agree that Pressfield's books, the ones I've read, have been terrific, but the button chair stuff does not work for me. Obviously, I get the
Yeah.
button chair, but there's something punitive about it that I don't respond to. What I
Mm-hmm.
try to lean into when I'm starting a writing session is something about the project that's fun, because inevitably there's parts, and it might be different for fiction, but for nonfiction, generally, you have a bunch of different kind of things going on. I might have an interview to transcribe and then kind of make some sense of, and all these different pieces, like break this out into bullet points. What I try to lean into is the one that seems easy, like, oh, I can just listen to that interview and just transcribe it. That doesn't require, because what it is for both of them, for all kinds of writing, is you are taking things into active memory. That's the pain
Mm.
that we're trying to avoid. It's like I've got to like understand these 8 things and start clicking them together, which fits into my composer craft. I realized I
Mm-hmm.
was reviewing my.
Hmm.
So it's like you're picking up these pieces and then you got to hold them there in place, and that's why the distractions are so painful, because I just read these 4 different notes in 4 different places to remember, like, here's the concept, here's how I'm going to explain it, here's the anecdote I'm going to use, and I'm going to segue into this. I've got to keep all those balls in the air and then
Mm.
start putting it together. Once it's all down and I have a shape, I can like relax. But there are extended periods where you have to like go, like when people do that
Mm-hmm.
exercise at the gym, they lift the weights and they have to like walk. I was like, and then to have someone interrupt you, you lose it. It flushes your memory out.
Yeah.
So to get myself into that zone is very painful. So if I can start easy by just transcribing or something light, my curiosity gets piqued. And then it's like, okay, I think I can bring myself, what's this over here? And suddenly I'm loading myself up, loading it. And then I realize there's a moment where I'm like, oh, I got it now. Good. Okay. And then I'm off to the races. But that
Yeah.
transition is really painful because I don't
Mm.
want to look at that big mess. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Because it looks like
absolutely.
spaghetti at first until
Yeah,
it
it's
resolves.
awful. It's like the first draft of anything. I think one of the things I learned years and years and years ago, but it was the first best lesson I learned about the writing process and the craft in general is if you think that your first draft of something is writing, writing is not that draft. Writing is rewriting. It's the constant process of revising, revising, revising. But it does feel incredibly good to finally take that compilation of ideas that has been sitting there and like get it out. It's very cathartic, actually. Is another feeling that comes up for me. It's like I get into a mode where it's like, for me, I don't have the opportunity to go into these spaces often at all because it's like very business oriented management kind of tasks throughout the day. So for me to carve out any maker time is very rare. But when I do, it's almost like I was overloaded and I need to get it out. I'm curious for you when you're writing, say you're working on a project, do you notice any difference between working on a project where you are a collaborator or an editor or the writer versus something that is manifest from your own mind, your own creative project?
Yeah, a big difference. And it's one of the reasons I'm doing this and not an author myself, I think. You know, there's
Mm-hmm.
something about my personality, and maybe you could offer some insight into this, but I question myself the way I don't question other people. In
Mm.
other words, I can look at someone else and say, oh, I know exactly what you should be doing. I get it. I get your platform. I get where you want to go with your career. You know, because I'm really thinking about the end point. You know, where are we going with this book? Let's just get there. And that makes decision making
Mm.
very easy because I'm like, I see what you're trying to do. Like, I get your niche, I get your audience. So let's just get there as efficiently as possible. With me, I don't know where I want to go. I'm as
Mm.
uncertain as anybody else. I don't have that exterior sense of myself. So when I start thinking about a book that I could write, and I have many aborted projects, I start thinking, is this really the book that I want to publish? Like, what do I look like to others? I can't work on my own website. I can't like I can
Mm-hmm.
barely my own social media profile. It's just too excruciating. I'm like, I don't even know how to present myself.
Yeah.
You know, what face do I present to the world? With someone else, it's the easiest thing in the world, and I get right to work. But for myself, I just create 100 more questions.
I feel the same way actually. I have a background in copywriting, which is very very different than creative writing of books, but it's essentially direct response, persuasion, sales, copywriting for brands and companies. Like writing a commercial or a video, script. And with that style of writing as well, if you tell me to write the Project Evo video script for our next product, it's very hard for me. It's very hard. I'm too close to it. Or especially if you were to tell me, for some idea. So I completely understand. My guess is that when the primary function of a person, when their compass is essentially external facing, I think that it's a little more challenging than when you have an internal facing primary compass because you're more in tune with your inner world versus you and I. Mine is relational, yours is determined. I think that there's something there where it's a little bit easier to process more rapidly externally. And so it's there, but then we become a little more self-critical perhaps and things like that. So I completely understand what you're saying. But at the same time, have you ever felt that the way your writing style activates when you do allow yourself to write? Is it better when you're writing for yourself? Is it like,
It's
do you
fun.
care more? That feeling?
What I do, and it goes back to my playwriting, is when I'm writing for someone else, I'm sometimes you're just explaining something, but when there's a little personality or opinion, I just imagine their voice, and I'm like, well, let me picture them saying this, or I'll read it out loud. I'm like, how does this sound? And I kind of tune in on their voice. And the problem is that sometimes I like to be a little colorful. You know, I'll come up with a really
Yeah.
funny, like a pun or like just a play on words, or there'll be a little bit of style to what I've written. And sometimes I'll work with somebody where it's like, I can believe that they would have written this and they'll get a kick out of it because it's their sense of humor or whatever. But most of the time I have to take it out. I'm like, that sounds like me
Mm,
now. And that's not good. It should not sound like me. I have a very peculiar way of writing when it's my own. And so I do a newsletter every week, and that's my opportunity
Ooh.
to let my own style out just for
Hmm.
700 words. And it's really, it's not a platform building. It's not about whatever. It's just really just to clear the deck and just to get that
Yeah.
out. You know what I mean? So I can then go back to writing like other people.
This newsletter is it specifically about the world of publishing, or what? Is there a
It's
theme?
for writers and
It's for
experts. So I
writers.
call it the Maven game because Maven is the sort of this Yiddish word for
Ah,
experts.
yeah.
And I've been doing it since the start of my business, so like 6 years now. And it's just, a place where I'll talk about these things. I'll talk about, how do you sit down and write, attention, how do you present yourself, how do you think about your work and your craft, and
Mm,
but I don't have to restrict myself. I don't have to write an outline. I don't have to worry about the
yes.
target market. I can relax all that and just riff off of something that I read or whatever, something that occurred to me, and it's just a way to just clear the pipeline.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Fascinating. I got to check out your newsletter, and I'll link to it for people as well. So speaking of publishing, you mentioned Norton. You said your first internship was at Norton. So for our book for Unleashed, we got an offer from an imprint of Norton, which was awesome. We decided to pass on it and went with BenBella. And apparently, contracts take months to put together. I had no idea. Jan, my agent, was telling us this, but actually, BenBella, she was telling me that because she was so surprised that BenBella came back with the contract so quickly. They're like, wow, it was like 2 week turnaround or something like that. So they're reviewing it and redlining it and all this new stuff for me. I mean, it's not new for me in terms of the business world, but it's all new for me in terms of the publishing world. So I found that very interesting, and so we're really excited. And obviously, we would not be there if it wasn't for you. We would not have this book deal. We would not be with BenBella. At the same time, I'm really curious, like your current state of the union. We were texting a bit about this and just talking about the world of publishing. What's the state of the union of publishing right now? What would you say the rest of 2021 is going to look like?
Well, the industry as a whole financially has been doing really well. Certain trends have, I mean, the pandemic obviously is huge for that. People were reading a lot more, just had a lot more time to kill.
Mm,
And all the political stuff drove a lot of sales, because when
yes.
things get big and complicated and people get frustrated because they can't get a sense of what's going on from the daily chaos of the news is just so every day. It's like, this is unprecedented after a certain point. Having someone who's
That
really
word kills
got a
me.
clear idea, it's crazy. And so the book is an opportunity for an expert who's really been paying close attention to sit down and really say, like, here's what's going on, and here are the trends that led to it. Here are the people who taught the people how to do what they're doing today. You know what I mean? These things
Mm-hmm.
didn't come out of nowhere. You got Roy Cohn back in the 60s and 70s, like all of these kinds of political tactics, they all have an origin story. And so that drove a lot of book sales. And so the industry as a whole is healthy, but all the trends are staring in bad directions. Simon and Schuster, which is one of the big five publishers, is now
Yeah.
being bought by Penguin Random House. Now
Crazy.
it's going to be big four publishers, and that can't be good. As
No.
diversity goes down, and there's pressures on all sides politically. People, cancel culture. There's a lot going on. And just what place does a publisher have? That's where everyone's kind of, look, what are we doing here?
Mm.
Also, it's important to remember that these different genres are really different products. They're all books,
Mm.
but a business book or a book of self-help is a different business entirely from a novel. And so trends that affect novels, and not just, there's literary fiction, which is sort of an adult world of like challenging and political and racial and ethnic and all these different things written about the time we're in. Then you have science fiction, you have fantasy, you have romance novels, you have mystery novels, and they all have their own rules and their own experts. And one business can thrive and one thing can be great for them, like Kindle can be great for romance novels and have no impact on business books, which they really did for a long
Yeah.
time. When I was at Amazon, it was still mostly hardcover because it's a different business. And people want to display the business. They want to display Simon Sinek's book on their shelf.
Yes.
And whereas a romance novel, you don't want anyone to know that you're reading. And one of the big eye-opening moments for me when I was at Amazon, so this is like 2012, let's say, someone came and basically said, because we were wondering why we were being sort of ignored, and someone came up to us and said that if you take all of literature sold, right, here's what Amazon sells. And then this is every book you've ever heard of, Shakespeare, Einstein, like everything. And
Mm-hmm.
then this is $1 romance novels.
No way.
No,
That's
completely
amazing.
true.
Oh my God.
And that's when that is one of those moments where you're like, oh, now everything makes sense. Everything
Hmm.
about the way you design the product, everything about the site, everything about what gets attention and what doesn't. It's always money.
Yeah.
And the fact is that romance novels read 7, 8 books a week, and they want to pay $1 for it, and they really don't care how well they're written.
Wow.
If they talk about AI writing books, like these
Yeah.
computers kind of digesting books, the first genre that
Will be
converts to
romance.
AI completely is going to be romance. Like, mark my words, because
Hmm.
it is a formula, and you got to replace the names. And he's a cowboy, and he's not a cowboy. That
Hmm.
genre drives most of the revenue. So,
Wow.
so then all these stories about hybrid publishing and vanity publishing and DIY publishing and maker, all that becomes very trivial. Like, once you realize from the big picture what we're talking about here. But
Amazing to
it's
hear that
it's
perspective.
in business, in the kinds of books and self-help, the kinds of books that I work on, and the kind of book you're publishing. Um, like I said, publishers don't really have the mechanics anymore. They don't have that mainstream, just like we don't have 4 TV channels anymore. You don't
Hmm.
have, like, these are the bookstores that sell books, and we're the only ones who can put books in them, right? Because now any place a hybrid publisher can distribute through these big publishers, and they can give
Hmm.
you the same editor, they can hire the same designer. Everything's outsourced anyway. It used to be that the actual
Creator
printing presses
economy.
were in the offices. The place I worked, my first writing job that I mentioned earlier, had the printing presses in the basement. They printed their own books, and we couldn't go down there. It was a super fun cleanup site because of the toxic inks. But and they shipped, and they also outsourced by the time I worked there. But that's how it used to be. A publisher was actually the publisher. If you look at a
Wow.
book from the 17th century, the bookseller was the publisher. It was
Mm.
everything. It was just one building, and it was like, you want this novel, you've got to come to this building and buy the book from us.
Hmm.
So
Wow.
it's a totally different model now, and anyone can get all the pieces of publishing. And so for a business author who has a company, like you said, or 3 companies and a platform, and they speak and they've got social media, where does the publisher come in beyond taste? And so the question is, because it is, taste is important, um, but affiliation, like, what's it worth to say Norton published your book? What's it worth to say Portfolio published your book? Do other
Hmm.
portfolio authors want to hang with you because they know you have the same editor? There is something there, but it's hard to quantify, especially when you consider how hard it is, like the months to get your contract. You could go and take a Microsoft Word document,
Holy shit, man.
So it's
Yeah.
hard. The business proposition is getting very complicated, especially for people who have big audiences. Do you know Derek Sivers?
Not personally.
He was the founder of CD Baby,
Yeah.
and he's been around forever on the internet. He's published all
Right.
these books, and he made the decision, to do it himself. He does everything himself. He just published a new book. I got an email on his newsletter, private, just to, like, his fans or whatever,
Hmm.
and it's like, buy this, $15. Here it is in all the formats. Great book. I don't know if he works with anybody or does everything in his basement. I
Mm.
wouldn't put it past him. But magnificent. I can't point to any aspect of it that was inferior. In fact, it was
Oh.
easier. I just, like, clicked buy, and the book is in my
Yeah.
Kindle. And, like, what does he need? The cover, I don't know if
Right.
he's gonna get a designer. Right now it's just text.
Oh.
But I'm very happy to be reading this book. It's certainly a far better
Oh.
book than most books that you get on the shelf. New World.
Wow.
So where do I fit in? I'm just watching. I'm gonna pivot when it becomes necessary to pivot.
That is mind blowing. That right there, that Derek Sivers example is the power of having an audience and a platform. I mean, the fact that he doesn't even need to go spend the money to get a fancy book cover. When you have people that admire you, your brain, your work, what you say, what you create, wow. It reminds me of Kevin Kelly's 1000 True Fans. I had him on recently and we
Absolutely.
talked about that as well. It was like when you have that, you really have a certain sense of freedom in life that is beautiful. And as you said, though, the traditional world, it's hard to quantify. But I came up with one thing that really helps me and a reason that it makes sense: accountability. The fact that I have to finish the book, the fact that people are waiting, that is a big deal for people like me. I don't know what it is, but it's worth something. and
It is
and
worth
I might
something.
not finish a book that I self-publish. It might just stay an idea forever. I don't think I'm like Derek Sivers. I think, in my, I mean, sure, I would sit down and do my thing and put it in a sauna and prioritize it, but it's still different. It's like that one email, that one text from someone, how's it going, how's chapter 3? I know it's going to make a big difference for me.
I'm sure there's a person out. I mean, I know of people who have not only sold their book, but actually have a book published, like the book is published, and they walk away from it because they get busy with something else. It is entirely possible to have a publisher and walk away from a book, lose interest in
Mm.
it, unable to complete it. Other people are very motivated by it. I tried hiring an editor once to keep me on task. It didn't work. I don't know if an actual book deal would have that effect on me, but we all click into it differently.
Hmm.
And some people, like Derek, will just sit in a room and just arbitrarily start and arbitrarily ship. And it's amazing. I'm blown away by it. But the funny thing about now is not that you can just throw something up. I mean, Derek has programming skills, so
Yeah.
he's able to do all that stuff. But it's not that. What amazes me is not that you can take a Microsoft Word document and make a Kindle and throw it up online. What amazes me is that you can do a tremendously good job
Hmm.
and make physical books of the highest quality as an individual. All of those tools are there, and it's affordable. A
Yeah.
friend of mine was going to make an animated film. I mean, he has money; he's an entrepreneur. But he was like, "Did you know that you can hire Mark Hamill to do a day of voiceover work for $1,000?" I was like, "Holy cow!
Hmm.
I can just hire Mark Hamill to do a voiceover for 1,000. Like that's a lot of money, but it's actually not a lot of money.
Yeah.
And likewise, you can print a book, a really good book, for in a five-figure sum. You can do a full print run of a
Yes.
really beautiful book and hire a cover designer and hire an interior designer
Yeah.
and get all that talent for a very reasonable sum of money. And there's a guy, Craig Mod, who's a photographer, sort of creative type, and he's another Thousand True Fans guy, and he did a book of he's fascinated by pizza toast, which is a Japanese thing. In Japan, they have these, I guess you'd call them diners that are all over the country. They're sort of a dying breed, but there was a generation in the 60s, 70s, and 80s where they built these all over the country, and they're real tiny. They don't really have a full kitchen. So the one thing that they could make with like a toaster for the people who are coming in for a cup of coffee was pizza toast. They had bread and they put some mozzarella and it became kind of an art form. They kind
Hmm.
of take it very seriously. And so he walks around Japan on foot. He's lived there for 20 years, and
Wow.
he walks around and takes pictures of the pizza toast and he documents these very authentic pizza toast places. And he wanted to do a book. And so he did a fundraising round from his audience, not through Kickstarter, built his own
Oh.
Kickstarter-ish platform using Shopify, and made up a print run of a $90 book, the kind of thing
Wow.
that you would get from a publisher like Phaedon, like an art book,
Yeah.
like a coffee table book. And he was able to do that. No apparatus, no team, no company, just contact this person. Can you do this? Can you do that? Do some stuff himself. Send it to the printer. The printer's happy to throw you in there. If you
Yeah.
get in at the right time of year, they've got space. Give me this paper, give me that. I mean, it's an outside company now. So the power of it is in your hands especially for an entrepreneur or business leader. You can easily afford all these things. And then you have a book that is indistinguishable. And if you think anybody on Amazon, like I do, scrolls down
Yeah.
to the publisher,
No, it's
not only
like
that,
impossible to
it's
find for
hidden.
most people.
Amazon doesn't
Yeah.
want you to care.
Yeah.
And frankly, a lot of new imprints, like the one that made your offer at Norton, are new. So it's not
Mm.
like you would recognize them anyway. It used to be like,
Mm.
oh, well, I know Penguin, I know Norton, I've heard of them. But the difference between some individuals made up imprint and a real new imprint at Simon and Schuster, like there's really no way, there's no
Huh.
badge, there's no blue check mark like you get
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
Twitter,
Yeah.
which maybe there should be, I don't know, but
Uh-huh.
that'd be useful. There's no way to tell
Hmm.
that it's traditional publishing, hybrid publishing, or just Craig Mod.
As you said, the reader doesn't care. The reader is
No,
like looking for the end product. Do I learn? Do
right?
I have value? Do I admire? Like the example. You know, I think that's one of the reasons I really like Scribe, because they connect the dots for people. It's like, but if you already have a great designer, you know who's going to do the printing for you, and you can put those pieces of the puzzle together. You can do it for super cheap and super professional, as you said. But then you go to a place like Scribe, and I really admire what they've done to the industry because they've taken that process and brought it down to like, I don't even know. I want to say right now their package for that is like $12,000, and you get everything. You do the writing yourself with that package, but like they handle it all. And then yes, you pay for the books and all of that, but even that's not that expensive. So if you have a dream of putting a book together, it doesn't have to cost a tremendous amount of money, as you said. And it's been very disruptive, obviously.
Well, there's two things that are important to keep in mind about this. There's the taste and smell, right? To use that metaphorically. And Tucker Max was a best-selling author. He's from that world, and he knows everyone he would ever need to know to offer the feedback that you would need. In other words, because before these so-called hybrids, which is basically what Scribe is, where someone kind of goes out on their own and starts a publishing company with these new terms and hires everything externally. They originally, I would get these books, these self-published books that were just disastrous.
Trash.
And it wasn't for a lack of technology. They could have hired the right people. They just had no idea. And they had no idea about the importance of copy editing. And they had no idea that you can't hire someone on a $99 cover design from one of those random sites and expect to get something that's going to convince anyone of anything. And so business authors who wanted to convey prestige, like they were creating this product and they didn't get it. It wasn't their world. They didn't have that expertise. And so these hybrids and people like Tucker, a lot of the hybrids are run by people from publishing. So they've got the eye. And they can say, well, you've got to use this kind of paper. You have to use, it's not going to look right. You got to hire this designer. This guy does all those kinds of covers that you're trying to imitate. And if you hire someone else, it's not going to look right, the smell and taste. So the hybrids do that part. What you don't get is the idea. And that is so important because, again, an expert has a whole universe of ideas, but they don't generally read in their category. If you're a psychiatrist or a therapist and you want to write a book about, some sort of self-help book, you've read textbooks in school. Now you go to professional conferences and read papers. You have no idea what the self-help shelf looks like. Why would you read self-help in therapy if you're a therapist? Aside from the one book you always recommend to your clients, they always have that one book, like this is how you raise your child. So you have no sense of what these books look like, sound like, what the tone of voice is, what the audience is. And that's where you need a publisher or someone like me, because they know the category.
Yeah.
And they'll say, listen, of all the things that you could do, the book that's going to resonate is this. And remember, it's not just the book that they're writing, but it's also their public face for years. That's going to be their book. Sometimes it's the only book they ever write.
That's true.
That's like, I'm that guy. And then sometimes they have to pivot 4-hour work week, 4-hour body, 4-hour chef. But generally speaking, you're kind of picking a direction for your thought leadership for a very extended period of time. And people do it not understanding how thought leadership works. And a hybrid can't do that for you. They're going to say yes to
everything. You paid them.
They're going to do it really well. They're going to make it smell right, but it might not be the right book, which is quite a colossal investment. And it always staggers me that someone would invest 5 figures in making the book look great and hiring the outside marketing firm. But it's like, did you think about the book before? It's like when you see that giant sci-fi blockbuster film and it's like, did anyone work on the script before? You know what I mean? Like before Waterworld, before you build that gigantic water world in the middle of the ocean with Kevin Costner, work on the script for an extra 2 months. Just get the story right. And then maybe you won't have the biggest flop in history.
Was that a really bad movie? I haven't seen it.
Waterworld was the famous, legendarily most expensive at the time because they had to build the giant water world in the middle of the ocean. And I think it got destroyed by a storm and they had to build a second water world.
Oh, no.
It's not a terrible movie, but at the same time, you're kind of like, get the easy part is getting the idea right.
Sure.
Because you can spend as long as you want. You can spend 6 months. Don't rush that part to get to making a really cool looking film. Make the, you know what I mean? Get the idea right and then hire the hybrid.
That's such a good point about when you go to a hybrid, as we're calling them, the professional publishing, helping you self-publish. They're going to say yes to most everything because you're paying them very good money. But that aspect of like, you're not getting the pushback in the areas that it's important in the creative process and the writing. And I think that is where where you come in and where you're invaluable. So, do you prefer this more independent career versus kind of the style that you had before?
Well, I didn't know about the pandemic when I signed on for this, and now all my colleagues, like I just
Mm,
met up with for coffee with one of my people, someone working at the imprint I used to work at, and they're remote,
mm-hmm.
and so they get to enjoy my freelancer lifestyle. They're at home, they
Oh,
slack in with their colleagues. It's a lot more amenable to my personality now, the way they have it set up now. But that said, I see what's going on here. There's I don't know how things are going to shake out, but there's a huge amount of volatility in this space, where you
mm.
have Simon and Schuster getting bought. I mean, that's a
That's a billion
colossal
dollar
thing.
company, right?
Yeah, it's easy. I don't
At
know what the
least
final
one or
number came
two.
out to be, but this is a huge company, huge publisher, and they're getting subsumed by an even larger publisher. And you have these situations where, for example, a business imprint at Penguin, a business
Mm-hmm.
imprint at Random House, and now you've got business books at Simon and Schuster. How do you navigate these things where an agent is bringing a book to a publisher that has like five different editors at five different publishing imprints within the publisher,
Mm,
all of whom would potentially want the book? Are they bidding against each other? And if they're not, why would you bother? You would just pick one, and then it's like, well,
mm-hmm.
which is going to last? So I'm happy to be here. Like I said, as things change, reinvent the book, whatever.
Yeah,
I feel like people like you are going to need some help figuring out how to present their ideas and package their ideas for their audiences,
always,
And
always.
so that's where I fit in, no matter how this changes. That gives me a sense of reassurance.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And the cool thing about people, entrepreneurs, or business people in general is they're much more likely to say yes to investing in somebody like that because they're just so used to doing it already in their business, and they know the value of like a great consultant who can come in, and regardless of the amount of money, they know that they're getting a tremendous amount of value. Not just because the thing that they're generally optimizing for is not just time but expertise. And expertise is relative. If you know 10% more than me about this topic, I should immediately bring you in to handle it because it's going to create a better end product. And so people like me do think that way, and I think that's why there will always be some level of market, whatever it shifts to will be very interesting, but we'll see. We were talking about this example of like self-publishing an incredible book yourself. I don't know if you and crowdfunding. I don't know if you saw Kevin Kelly's most recent book, but it's really interesting. So Kevin Kelly, obviously like traditionally published author, has had some awesome books that I personally love, like What Technology Wants and The Inevitable. And then he is also a photographer, so he wanted to create a coffee table photography book, but they said no. They said no to him after all these years of him selling a shit ton of books. They were like, "No, Kevin, no book for you." And he was like, "You got to be kidding me." So he was like, "Okay." So he decided to do a crowdfunding, and crowdfunding for like people that don't know, you're not raising money for like a company. You're just pre-selling. You're pre-selling your book, and it's actually a wonderful thing because it's like you're paying for the cost of production. You're proving that people want the book. I think more people should utilize crowdfunding in general, product crowdfunding, and now we have equity crowdfunding, right, for businesses where people like you and I and anybody can invest in a business. But Kevin put this up, and it's called Vanishing Asia. It was $200. I got one. It's a set of three books. I want to say like three huge books, $200. And last I checked, he raised or pre-sold. He hit his 1,000 true fans. I think he something like close to $400,000. I want to say like $370,000. Last I checked, absolutely remarkable, man. It's like that would be a dream for the publisher. Like to sell even six figures. I mean, better, right? But like they're just hoping you sell a certain amount of copies, and to get to that figure before people can even actually go and purchase the book and receive it, that's all pre-sales. That's incredible. Obviously the book is $200 a unit. That helps a lot, requires a lot less sales. But again, power of having a great product, power of the internet, the digital age. I think it's a really cool case study that more people in publishing should kind of take a look at.
Absolutely. And I think that there's probably a market for people to help people as there are people now like Clay Hibbert who help people with crowdfunding in general,
Yeah.
to help specifically artists. And I've done that. I've purchased books and games and movies and other things through Kickstarter and other platforms
Yeah.
because I wanted that project to happen. And I saw Kevin's project, and really, if you have an audience, what a wonderful way to express your creativity. It just makes so much sense, than going to make a deal with some other entity, to just say, hey guys, would it be cool if I did this?
Mm-hmm.
And Kevin Smith does a lot, of that. He's always interacting
Mm-hmm.
with his audience, saying like, should I make a movie about a guy who's turned into a walrus, Tusk? That all comes from their audiences.
Oh, wow.
And I think a lot of my authors are probably going to, especially for that physical object, a book is actually a tremendous bargain when you think about it.
Oh my God.
$25 for a hardcover. It's only possible because of the miracle of scale. And especially for these bigger, beautiful art books that are out there as an object. And when you combine that with the idea of a limited edition, to get it directly from the person, it's like I'm making, Craig Mont did like, I think 200 in his first, and it sold out in like an hour. And they're all numbered. And so you now have this incredibly direct connection. I funded one book and I'm in the acknowledgments. They acknowledged all the Kickstarter people. And it's
Oh,
like 10 pages of names, but I was like, look at me, my name's in the book. Like, what
wow.
a wonderful satisfaction to have that kind of connection, which was never possible before.
Wow.
This is something that only can exist here with the internet. And that's new. And I'm really excited about it.
I don't remember who said this. It might have been Ramit Sethi, but he basically said like, $25 for a book. If you learn one thing, you basically just got like let's call it $500 worth of value from one idea. One idea. You could argue that you get thousands of dollars of value from a book. And the worst case scenario is that it's a shitty book and you leave it on the counter and you lost $25. But if you just repeat that process over and over again, you're going to end up, winning. There are so many books that I buy knowing that either my plan is to read them, right? But the feeling of just being absorbed, like being in having them in my environment and absorbing them from time to time. And I changed the way I used to read, where I had a rule that I had to read in a very linear way. I had to start the book, I had to finish the book. If I started it, that was it. It was only that book. And I recently read that kind of, back in the day, in particular during the Renaissance times, the way people would think, very oracle-like. They had processes that seemed chaotic, but they were actually beautiful in their chaos, in that they allowed themselves to pick up a book, look at the chapter titles. Yep, that's the chapter I want to read today. Open it. Ooh, this is exciting. Keep reading. Ah, I just got bored. Put it down. Pick up another one. Have one sort of centralized notepad where they keep track of, ooh, that was a good idea. That was another good idea. Freedom to explore these various ideas. And so that allowed me to start buying way more books. Like, I'm just like, whatever. Because oh, no, I can't. I can't start that book, so I probably shouldn't get it yet. I'll just save it. I'll just get it later. These stupid rules that I'd created for myself, and now I'm just like, bring it on, give them to me. I'll read for 10 minutes. Maybe I walk
Yeah.
away with one idea. I think books are God. I could serenade books all day long with you. Like I think books are the most incredible thing. Typically 3 to 5 years of someone's obsession and life's work distilled down into, call it, 200 pages. Wow. Like, wow. Because when we podcast, we're just going, we're just flowing. There's no editing here. And that is beautiful in and of itself as well. It's a different way to learn. It's a different way to capture the information and knowledge from somebody. But a book, that process of editing and refining and not wasting a single word, that's incredible. Very, very different.
Yeah. And unlike fiction, where obviously it's not as much fun to dip in and out, you're just
Mm-hmm.
kind of getting swept along. With nonfiction, it's extraordinary. It can look like, I mean, I do that, what you're talking about. I always have like a scattering of books that I'm kind of adding to my queue, and I just pick up a couple in the morning and spend some time. But you can grab the core ideas from a book so quickly if you really had to. I
Mm.
enjoy reading them, but if I really had to just grab one of these books and kind of get the like five really good core ideas from that book, I could do it in 15 minutes because that's how they are. They're so dense and they tend to, go back and recycle. And if you just look at the TOC and kind of break through, which is they call it breaking a book in academia, like you can really designed to be read quickly
Mm-hmm.
very often.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can get in there and be like, wow, like this is, like Creativity Inc., which is Ed Catmull, who founded Pixar, talking about Pixar's creative culture. And it's
Wow.
just, you can just pick that up and there's an amazing story on every other page about how Pixar does what Pixar does. And you can just grab it and run with it for that day. So absolutely. And then you have a commonplace book, you take your great stuff, come back to it later. I find it so valuable. My favorite thing is artistic memoirs of artists. I've been reading a lot of dancer memoirs, Martha Graham and people like that.
Huh.
And because I take lessons to writing from other arts, or from
Yeah.
computer programming or from other areas. And I just try and pick up what I can get. Like if this is true of this thing that requires dedication and focus or concentration or flow, how can I apply that to writing and editing?
Mm. So memoirs, is that kind of your favorite? You brought that up a couple times. Is that kind of your favorite style of book? Would you say?
Well, what I like about it is someone else guessing about how this person did something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's actually
True.
what they went through because they did not know they were going to succeed. That's the critical difference. When someone else writes about Pixar, they're looking and saying, well, clearly this was all part of the plan because look, they did A, B, and C, and now they have Pixar. But when you see it from the other end, from the person going through it, then you can draw a lesson from it. You're like, oh, that's what it looks like when you're starting a project. He also
Mm.
was completely lost and had no idea. And they thought they were going to sell computers when they started
Whoa.
Pixar. They thought they were going to sell computers. And there were quite a few twists and turns before they finally settled into this movie, making movies themselves. So you can look at your own project and say, okay, well, this isn't working, but that doesn't mean you walk away from it.
Hmm.
What were the things that he did to kind of keep pushing it forward until it clicked? And so I take lessons from that.
Hmm. Wow, that's one hell of a pivot. I didn't know that. What have been your favorite recent books, and just kind of like your top ones of all time that you tend to go back to?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's funny you mentioned Stephen King. I have read that book several times on writing,
It's magnificent.
and it's a delightful book. Stuff that I've read recently, I mean, I read a book on electronic music production. I don't even listen to electronic music. The Mental Game. I saw the title. I think it's self-published, talking about a book where someone's sharing their expertise. The Mental Game of Music Production. And I saw the Mental Game. I was like, that's so interesting. Like he's making a particular genre of music, but he's not talking about that at all. There's none of that in the book.
Hmm.
He's entirely talking about the psychology of it. And as I suspected when I bought it, it's exactly the same. Like everything he says is absolutely true of writing, just about getting in the zone, finishing work, setting expectations that are realistic, having goals. And another one I've read that is for writers is The Organized Writer. This is a guy I follow his newsletter, and this was published by Bloomsbury. And he just talks, he's a writer like me with lots of writing projects, which is one problem a lot
Mm.
of writing books don't get into because they're written for
Yeah.
novices. And it's like, here's how you write your novel. And it's like, well, what if I've got 2 projects or 6 projects? How do I keep them
Yeah.
distinct in my mind? How do I organize myself mentally? And he's not talking about file folders, really. He's talking about mentally, how do you organize your time and your energy
Totally.
effectively? Because he does a screenplay, and he does a comic book, and he does a novel. And that was so valuable to me. So just writing wise, those have been really special. And then as far as books in general that
Hmm.
I've been delighted by, the one that comes to mind right now is This Anything, which is Jerry Seinfeld's book. And at first
Oh.
I was totally turned off, but I love Seinfeld. I love especially listening to him talk about his writing habits, which he's done a lot lately. He was on Tim Ferriss's podcast. But even
Yeah.
before that, he did a special where he laid out all of his jokes on a street in Manhattan, and it filled like the whole road, every direction. All of his jokes that he'd written over his career, just like a vast amount of material. It gave you a sense. And I remember, comedians like Joan Rivers, they have these index cards, like thousands, just like a library of just like the volume of material. And so I'm very interested in his. I mean, he's synonymous with consistency. A lot of early productivity advice would say the Seinfeld technique, which is not true. But this idea that he does a joke every
Like
day,
every
and
day.
don't break the chain, that's not true. But we think of him that way. And so what he did was he actually just assembled all of his humor in one book. The book is just his act from the 70s to today, ending on jokes about the coronavirus pandemic, beginning with jokes about, stuff in the 70s. And I looked at it at first and I was like, I don't want to read a whole book that's all sentences. It's literally just like a sentence, space, a sentence.
Hmm.
I was like, I'm never going to get into the flow, but I decided to push through it. And it was such a delight. It's like poetry when
Huh.
you read it on the page. It's all about how the words sound. Which is what you laugh, right, with comedy.
Yeah.
There's also laughter, but poetry. The distinction that I've always read between poetry and prose is poetry is how it sounds, and how, what it means is secondary.
Hmm.
And in a way, he's a poet. It's
Yeah.
the first book of
I see
poetry I've
that.
ever completed.
What about
I have some
fiction?
books of poetry here, but they're not going to get finished.
Any favorite like fiction stories, anything like that?
I'll tell you, I'm not going to say guilty pleasure. I would never insult a guy, but a one of my a guy I know in publishing who's
Hmm.
older blogged about the Spencer novels. And I remembered Spencer when I was a kid. There was a show called Spencer for Hire, which was based on these novels. They're like, and it's not my genre at all. They're sort of
Hmm.
crime detective novels. But he talked about Spencer, and it just caught my attention. I was like, I'm curious. Like, what were those Spencer novels? In the last, I don't even want to say, in the last month, I think I'm like those romance readers. I think I've read like 35 of these books.
Hmm.
They're all short. They're all like 60 short chapters.
Hmm.
I can be giving my daughter a bath or just waiting online, like any of those sort of daily things. I can pull out my Kindle and I can read one of the chapters of these books. And, which he wrote over 40 or 50 years before he died. And I'm loving it.
Wow.
And the heavier stuff takes a cognitive strength that I just don't always have with me. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? When you're
Hmm.
writing all day to then get into a novel that really is challenging, it
Yes.
might be beautiful and very rewarding. And there are times in my life when I've read a lot of that kind of book. Now I'm all about Spencer, getting into gunfights and finding clues.
Do you would you say you have like a daily ritual that's pretty consistent? Is it yeah? Is it like a little
Oh yeah.
okay, tell me
I
about this.
cornered one time. I cornered. There's my favorite thing in the New York Times is called the Sunday Routine. It's a column that they do. It used to be before the pandemic really ridiculous. They would find some fashionista Manhattan type with this glamorous lifestyle, and their Sunday was just ridiculous. Like they'd go to two separate spit classes in the same day, and they have eight
Hmm.
kids, and they also have three companies, and none of it made sense. There's just no way this person was really doing all the things they were
Yeah.
saying they were doing. So I would read it for the pure delight of the false front that these people were putting forward about their Sundays. And then in the pandemic, they read the room and they shifted, and now it's all about frontline workers and essential workers and the first and it's just grindingly upsetting. It's really tough.
Mm.
People working, getting up at 4 a.m. to get to the hospital and doing this, and so it's a very different reading experience. But I am obsessed with routines. Daily Rituals by Mason. That's a great book,
Yes,
actually.
great
Daily
book.
Rituals, and then he did a new one, Daily Rituals, with only women because he didn't have enough women. Um, so I'm all about the routine, and I'm up at 5, and I've got yoga, and I've got meditation, and I've got to get in the mindset. And
Wow.
my desk is set up in a certain way, and I set it up the night before. And this morning is a perfect example of this self hypnosis. I
Hmm.
don't have the color coded, but I have a like a posture thing that kind of makes you sit up straight,
Mm.
and I couldn't find it. And my session, like my writing session, starts at 7 a.m. I'd done all the stuff, and I couldn't find this strap. I don't need it,
Yeah.
but it was my ritual, and I start freaking out. I'm like, I was like looking at my daughter and got a tent set up. She put it in her tent. She took daddy's strap. Where's my strap? I'm running all around the apartment because I feel like I can't, like, it won't be as
Yeah.
good a writing session. And then finally I look, and it had just kind of gotten tucked into my chair. It was
Oh
there the whole
wow.
time. And
Wow.
so I started my session a few minutes into it. But yeah, I feel the difference when I follow the ritual from the whole thing. It took a while to kind of get into the groove, but now that I'm in the groove, when I follow the ritual, I enter the zone so much more easily
Hmm.
than just sitting down,
And
you
do you
know?
have a goal for that time, or is the goal just to have to show up?
The goal for me, and I don't always hit this goal, is to write first. The instinct is to start tidying or to reread something I wrote
Yes.
and get sucked up into editing,
Oh,
sucked up into organization. I don't really get much done if that happens.
yeah.
I need to start drafting. And part of that is having it set up for myself. So I like, you need to go here. And I'll make notes. I'll be like, I'll put 3 asterisks. It's like, this is where
Yes.
you were. And I go right here and then tell this story. And I was inspired. One of my newsletters recently, I hope no one was offended. I watched a short documentary about this powerlifting gym Uh, they were all the big powerlifters go talk about taking lessons from other
Mm-hmm.
areas, and they use whatever it takes to get the numbers. And they have a big board where they put the numbers. This is the weight I lifted. Put it up on the board. That's the only thing that matters, to the
Mm.
point where they use whatever chemicals they need to use. They ruin their bodies. Every part of their
Totally.
body is broken. These men are destroying themselves to meet these numbers. And there was something about the purity of that intention that I really wrote. I was like, I get that. And for me, the number is the word count.
Mm.
So a few weeks ago, I have this chalkboard over here. I put all the days, Monday through Sunday, and then I put the word count that I got that day across projects.
Ooh.
And I see some days are good, 1219, that's pretty good. Some days are not so good, 667. Some days, just a line. Didn't get around to putting down a lot of new words that day.
Mm-hmm.
But the hope is, that if I kind of get in the groove of going for that number,
Yeah.
that builds that consistency. Because believe me, the last thing I want to do is start writing. I
Mm.
want to fiddle. I want to look. I want
Totally.
to,
Totally.
so the number, I'm going for the number.
Got it. So there is a goal to write every day, to draft every day.
Yeah. And if I can be consistent, my first goal right now is just to be consistent,
Yeah.
just to have a number every day. That
Yes.
alone would be a step forward. And then when I get to
Totally.
that point, well, what's the right number? You know,
Yes.
and is it 500 words? Is it 1,000? Because different sections, this isn't fiction. Fiction, you kind of go. It's not like a
You
different
just
part of the
go.
story. I mean, sure, there might be some research, but generally, when you're doing a first draft in fiction, you're not digging in to the exact layout of the pyramid where your characters are trapped. And you're like, I've got to look at the pyramid layout. You kind of guesstimate it. If
Mm-hmm.
you can't remember something, you just kind of put a placeholder, and then you worry about getting the details right later. In nonfiction, if I'm trying to articulate a concept, I might really have to work on two paragraphs for a long time. And that's frustrating when you have a word
Yeah.
count to hit. But some stuff writes easy, some stuff is a beast because you have to articulate something that has never been articulated before. You have to take somebody's thing that they do instinctively,
Mm.
their expertise that they do reactively. Most experts are reactive. Something happens to their business, they do something about it. But can they tell you what their thought process was and how someone else could operate in the same way in their scenario?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I have to do. And that's hard. And that can be very, very hard. And that's
Big
slow.
time. Big time. And I find that that process of writing something fresh for the first time, the first draft of something, and that mode, which you're saying is priority, is a completely different. It's just a completely different state of mind. It's a completely different place to operate from versus taking something that exists, doing the research, filling in the gaps, revising and editing something. It's just very different. And yet, what I think I need to do sometimes is actually separate those into different modes in my day, if that makes sense. Because I think I try to do something similar to what you're saying, and I'm like, well, today, like, because it's so easy for me to go and do the other thing as well. Like, no, 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 this is easier. I'll just pick this up. But I love that idea. It's like, no, 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 this is where I'm starting right here. These three asterisks. I'm going to pick up the point here. And I think it might have been Hemingway or Stephen King that was like, don't
It's
finish the
Hemingway who would leave it in the middle.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. That
That's
don't
sad about
finish the
Hemingway. I don't know if
sentence.
it's true.
Yeah. Right.
It is modal. It is modal. Like when I'm doing it the night before and I'm kind of looking, I'm trying to prep myself. It is precisely for that reason that there's a kind of a mode of where am I? What am I doing? Where's the research? Where are all the pieces? What am I going to do next? And then the writing mode where it's like, now I'm going, I'm moving forward, I'm putting
Mm-hmm.
down fresh words, and I don't want to mix those because it's too easy to get entangled. And so separating them is really important for me. Writing is writing. And I know when I'm writing and I know when I'm not
Got it.
writing. And the hard part is getting more of that writing time done. And it's by separating it out. The closest analog of all the different things that I look at for advice is programming, because that's
Hmm.
essentially you're thinking things through. Like programming is how would we solve this problem generally? You know how to add 2 plus 4, but how would I add anything plus anything? You have
Mm-hmm.
to kind of make rules. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what these books are basically saying. Like, I say I made $1 million in the stock market. Here is a set of rules. Here's an algorithm that you can apply for your own investing. Pixar, I made Pixar. That's very specific. You can't go start Pixar, but is there an algorithm to creative companies that you can use for your own creative company.
Mm-hmm.
So programming is very similar. And what they do in programming is they talk to a rubber duck. This is a common like piece of advice. You explain how it should work to a rubber duck that you'll have on your desk. I've heard this story a lot. It's
Huh.
a common thing. And just by in saying it out loud, it's like, here's what we want the program to do. That activates a part of the brain because you're talking to someone as opposed to you just sitting there and staring at a keyboard. So, for me, talking about it, talking it out to someone else, and I don't know if you noticed me doing this with you, but I'll do it where I'll be like, let me just mirror back what I think
I do.
you're saying. And of
I
course, they
noticed
didn't
that.
actually say it, they just described what they did, but
Yeah.
I'm trying to extrapolate the algorithm. Here's Arman's approach,
Yeah.
and so I'll say, like, let me remember this back. So you look at the problem and you organize yourself this way, and then you present yourself this way, and then you do it one of these 5 ways. And they'll be like, yes, because it gels with what they, or no, I would never take that action, but I'm giving them something to bounce off of. And so my clients are my rubber ducks, which is nice. Although sometimes I am stuck in here talking to myself. But I
Uh-huh.
do find that saying it out loud almost immediately resolves. If I'm stuck, and just how do you say this? If I just say it out loud, I don't know why, but it activates a part of the brain that might have fallen asleep.
That's brilliant. It's so cool to get this whole side of the way your mind works and your craft, because after working with you for a year, on our book, it was just an incredible process for me, but I was always curious about, what is his process? Like, how does he get into flow? How does he do all this? I mean, and to get both sides of that, I'll be honest with you, Dave. I've worked with a lot of people, especially in business, and even on this book, this journey, and everything like that. And you're by far one of the best people I've ever worked with. And I think I've told you that directly, maybe not. But no,
Thank you.
I think I hinted at it. So I'm telling you now more directly. You are literally by far one of the best people I've ever worked with, and I could deconstruct that in many ways. But I think it is ultimately it comes down to like what I am getting now out of this conversation is an understanding of why that is. You're dedicated. You're extremely dedicated to improving on a daily basis and refining your craft, because you're not playing it like this guy with a big ego who's like, look at me, I've already done it. I've been in this industry for long enough. I know what I need to know. You want to work with me, you work with me, great. If not, and there's this student aspect to everything that you're doing. But also I think the oracle part of you really helps make you more dangerous than anybody else. I think it's like a very unique combination, this determined oracle thing, that just makes it easy for you to communicate with people, extract what it is that they're really trying to say, and then go into your process that you've developed as a ritual over so long. And I don't know, the whole thing for me was just easy. You just make everything easy. And typically people I work with make things harder. And I'm like, oh, I never should have outsourced this, or I never should have done this. And you probably know what I mean. You probably felt the same
Yeah.
way, because it's like the purpose of collaborating and working with somebody is to make your life easier and to bring in an expertise that you didn't have. And that's exactly what you did for me. And that's exactly what I've told everybody. And so thank you. I just want to say really thank you for what you
You're
did and
welcome.
making it all possible. Yeah, man. So if somebody wants to work with you, there I basically plugged the shit out of you. If somebody wants to work with you, how should they do that?
Well, you can give the link to my website, which is the company's called Bookatect, which,
Hmm.
I was like, I'm going to start a company, architect, Bookatect, perfect URL.
Hmm.
And they can just, contact me through the site. I work with, my specialty is people who are legit, like you guys. And, if you're not, what I always tell people is like, if people aren't already out there clamoring, to some extent, if you don't have a path to that at least, then you're not ready for the book, because the book is a crystallization. It's
Mm.
like, I've been doing this thing, I've been doing this thing. Now I'm going to show you, what's going on here, and give you this really deep, deep, deep understanding of what I'm up to, or what you need to do to be like me, or whatever.
Mm.
And there's that misconstrued idea from old school publishing where the publisher's going to make you into that thing. And it's like, no, they were already, you may not have heard of Brene Brown, before she became a big best-selling author, but she was there. she was working. All these people were out there doing their thing for a long time. And so that's the kind of thing, that's the kind of folk that I work with now, folk singular. But I'm always happy to help people if they have questions and point them in the right direction. There's a lot. The thing that kills me, like you said, is when someone works with bad help.
Ugh.
And I've heard so many stories of people hiring multiple ghostwriters, 3 ghostwriters, paying their whole fee, and then they vanish. They leave town like they're like cowboys. They just rode off into the sunset. It's like, how does even someone ride up in 2020? But it happens.
Yeah.
These projects just fail. And again, it's taste and smell. If you don't have the publisher guiding you, you don't know who to go to. You don't know who's good. It's like trying to find a doctor. Like, how do you get a recommendation? You have to know other authors, which many people don't yet. Have a network of other authors. They can't get good help. So I'm always happy to point people towards reliable, helpful people. Maybe not as helpful as I am, as amazing as I am, but there's good people all over the place.
Yeah, different stages of someone's career.
So people can always reach out.
Yeah,
exactly. And there's always something to be done. There's always a next step on the path. Even if you're not ready to go to Penguin Random House, Simon & Schuster with your book proposal, there's always the next thing that someone in your position should be doing, and I can probably tell you a person what that is.
Yeah, totally. Well, I mean, you have my recommendation with no reservations.
Thank you, Arman. That's nice of you.
Yeah, man. Any other closing thoughts as we wrap up? This has been so amazing for me.
Yeah, no, I love it. And I have one suggestion for you guys at Project Evo.
Oh, please.
What I would love is you gotta connect us. I want to meet some other determined oracles. I was just sitting here thinking, like, of all the people that I've met, you guys in the organization, I was like, no one ever was like me. I would be so curious just to see, like, is there a similarity? When I talk to a determined oracle, am I going to be like, my blood brother, like, where have you been all my life? Or blood sister, like we get each other. We're on the same wavelength.
Yeah.
I'm just so curious. Or would we hate each other? I don't know. But there should be some sort of pairing service, like, can we work together on Focus Me? Like, put us together. Maybe something amazing could happen. Or are there complementary pairings?
I see an app.
Right?
Well,
right? Anyway.
some sort of, I think that the number one thing people really want is very related to what you said. They want a live event. People want to get together, get in that kind of world of the elements, and see other determined oracles, talk to them, hang out with them, and see why maybe they don't quite understand the compelled explorer the way they would like to, and be like, it's all making sense now. And so I think a live event, some sort of
with
gathering
badges,
with the book.
Yeah.
Totally.
Color coded,
I think maybe even before the book comes out, actually. Why not? Because like you said, it's like the book is just meant to enhance the overall project and the vision. So I think some sort of live event. I'm over the whole virtual thing. I can't do more Zooms. I'll do these are amazing, because this is like pure flow state. We're so having an intentional conversation. It's so different than like a meeting. But outside of that, man, I want real life engagement again. So we'll make that happen.
That's great. Yes, absolutely. Let me know when you're in town.
Absolutely. Awesome. Thank you, Dave. Really appreciate your time. Can't wait to get this out. The Oracle of Publishing. That would be a good title for this. I think I might call it that.
There you go.
All right, man. That's a wrap.